The sound of the reel was the only thing that broke the morning stillness. A thin mist clung to the hollow of the riverbed where water had pulled back weeks ago, leaving only a narrow thread of current and wide patches of cracked mud. The fisherman cast his line across the shallows, the motion practiced and silent. His dog waited at the edge of the exposed stones, ears pricked, watching the silver arc of line fall into the low water. The air smelled of wet clay and the faint tang of decay from stranded reeds. It was a lonely stretch of river, miles from the nearest road, and that was what he liked about it. No voices, no engines, just the rhythm of cast, wait, and retrieve. For a time, everything was still. Then the dog let out a short, sharp growl. He looked over. The sound didn't match the usual warnings of wildlife. It had weight to it, a low vibration that made his chest tighten. The dog was staring fixedly at a mound of silt a few yards off, where the fog hung thickest. The fisherman chuckled under his breath. "Probably just a branch, boy. Calm down." But the dog's fur stayed raised along its spine. He reeled in the line and started toward the spot. The mud pulled at his boots, sucking softly with each step. Near the mound, he saw what the dog had seen. A curved shape, half buried in the dark sand, slick with water. At first glance, it looked like driftwood, pale and smooth from years underwater. But when the fog shifted, something beneath it caught the light, a quick glint, too clean to be wood. The dog barked again, louder this time, and took a step back. The fisherman hesitated, squinting. The shape wasn't uniform. Some parts curved like limb joints, others narrowed to edges too precise for nature. He knelt, brushing aside loose silt with the back of his glove. The surface underneath was neither metal nor stone. He couldn't tell. It was dull, almost organic, yet it reflected the weak dawn light with a faint sheen. A cool pulse of unease ran through him. He'd fished this section for years and never seen anything like it. The stories his father used to tell, about relics turned up when the currents changed, nudged at him now. Back then, it had been myth mixed with drink, charms pulled from the deep, things best thrown back. He almost smiled at the memory. Almost, because the air had changed. Fog lifted off the bed in slow curls, revealing the exposed channels like empty veins. The dog whined now, refusing to step closer, tail tucked so hard it brushed its belly. Every instinct told him to listen, to walk away, pack up, and head home before the sun rose fully. But curiosity worked its slow grip. If it was old, maybe valuable, maybe something left from before the dam upstream, it could be worth looking at. Just a quick dig to know what it was. He reached out again, fingertips grazing the surface. The texture was odd. Smooth, yes, but with faint grooves patterned like something carved by hand. The sensation made his skin feel colder than the morning air. Behind him, the dog growled in a tone he'd never heard before, deep and trembling. The fisherman turned once more to the fog, the mound, the hidden glint beneath dark water. He didn't yet know this would be the last morning the river felt ordinary. He told himself he'd only clear enough to see what it was. Curiosity needed just a few inches of proof. The first scoop of wet silt clung to his fingers like cold wax. He wiped it on his pant leg and dug again, leaning on his knees, the mud squelching softly beneath him. The dog stayed several yards back, pacing in short, anxious bursts, whining low with a sound that carried through the fog. "Easy," he muttered, "just a bit of buried driftwood." But the words didn't carry conviction. Each handful brought up something smoother. Beneath the silt lay a surface that wasn't shaped by river erosion. When he traced the contour with his thumb, he felt deliberate form, an indentation where a shoulder might have been if this were a human figure. Only the proportion was wrong. Too long in the limb, too narrow at the waist, neither masculine nor feminine. Something else entirely. He paused, leaning back on his heels. A dragonfly hovered briefly across the mud, its wings catching the thin light before darting away. For a fleeting moment, he felt relief in that ordinary movement, some proof that nothing strange was truly happening. Then the dog growled again, one sharp note of alarm, and went silent almost immediately after, crouching low to the ground. The fisherman's hand found the edge of the object. He scraped gently with a flat stone, exposing more of the buried thing until its outline began to show. The figure was about the size of a child, though heavier than its shape suggested. The material was pale gray, threaded with tiny, darker specks like veins. It looked softened by time, but not eroded, as if water had taken everything around it except the will to decay. He shifted his knees, dug deeper at its base. The mud grew denser, older, darker. When he struck something solid he knew was not part of the sculpture, the sound came muffled and deep, like striking packed clay over hollow space. The idea of there being a cavity beneath the riverbed made him swallow hard. He ignored it and worked faster, his hands black with silt. "You see? Nothing to worry about," he said, glancing back. The dog didn't meet his eyes. Its body stayed rigid, ears pressed flat, as if some invisible boundary separated them. He brushed more mud away. A face appeared, if it could be called that. Smooth plains where eyes should have been, a shallow rise marking the nose, no mouth, no expression. But the shape had balance, intention. Someone or something had made this to resemble a living form and then erased the humanity from it. Up close, the fisherman noticed an almost imperceptible warmth beneath the grime, the way sun-warmed rock holds heat long after sunset. He placed his palm against it and felt that pulse of heat push faintly against him, as though the stone itself remembered movement. He jerked his hand back, staring. The temperature of the air hadn't changed, yet his skin tingled. He told himself it was his imagination, the way chilled fingers sometimes trick you. Still, he waited for the shiver to pass before continuing. His father's voice, gravelly from tobacco, surfaced in his memory. Stories of relics dragged from low tides, things meant to stay where the water left them. "If a river wants to give something back," the old man used to say, "you ask it why before you take it." He almost laughed at his own foolishness for thinking of it now. He slid his fingers beneath the figure's shoulder and pried gently. Mud sucked at its back like a stubborn breath. When it came free, water from the deeper pockets gurgled up, carrying gray bubbles that popped softly against his wrist. He set the object upright. It stood on its own, balanced on a tapering base that wasn't quite feet. The smell of the river intensified, brackish, metallic, thick enough to taste. He shuffled back a step, breathing through his sleeve. The dog barked once, voice cracking like dry wood. "Fine," he said quietly. "We'll leave it be, all right?" But even as he said it, his gaze lingered on the figure's torso. Along its center ran faint ridges, almost like overlapping scales carved into spiral patterns. The marks repeated with subtle symmetry, converging where a heart would be. He rubbed them clean with his thumb. Mud gave way to a dull sheen, and he realized the spirals weren't carved. They were inlaid, some other material fused within the stone. Wind rippled across the shrunken channel, lifting the edge of his jacket. The fog began to thin, revealing rippling pools that mirrored the gray sky. It should have felt like morning clearing, but every sound, the rustle of reeds, the croak of a distant heron, seemed far away, as if wrapped in glass. The fisherman pressed his hand to the figure's chest again. Warm. Almost a heartbeat now. He snatched his hand back in alarm. The movement startled the dog into barking continuously, tail down, moving backward. Each bark echoed strangely, more hollow than air should allow. He buried the figure halfway again, meaning to cover it, to undo whatever he had started. But something in him refused to stop. The thought of leaving it unfinished agitated him more than the fear. "Just one good look," he said aloud, though his voice didn't sound like his own. He lifted it fully at last, water streaming off the grooves. The weight shocked him, far heavier than stone that size should have been. Muscles in his shoulders strained, just holding it chest high. The surface now glistened as if oiled, and when he tilted it, the faint lines across it shimmered, forming fleeting ripples like moving reflections. The dog's final bark rang sharp, desperate, and then silence. It stood rigid, every muscle drawn tight, eyes fixed on the object as if it were alive. In that suspended stillness, the fisherman's curiosity flickered with something dangerously close to triumph. Whatever this was, he'd found it. He thought of collectors, museums, the story he could tell in the tavern. The promise of worth overcame all else. When he lowered the sculpture to the ground, a slow drip fell from its surface, even though no water clung to it. Each drop hit the mud with a steady rhythm, like measured breathing from somewhere below. The air pressed close, heavier now, and he realized the fog hadn't returned. It had risen from the ground itself. He turned at last toward his trembling dog and whispered, "It's just a rock." But even as he said it, the mud beneath his boots shifted with a quiet sigh as though the river were inhaling. By the time he reached the cabin, the sun was creeping behind thin clouds, dimming the valley to a washed bronze. The sculpture sat wedged in the back of the truck, wrapped in a torn burlap sack that had once held feed. Even under layers of cloth, it seemed to radiate faint warmth against his knees as he drove. The dog refused to ride in the truck bed like usual, choosing instead to cling to the passenger seat, ears flattened, eyes never leaving the bundled shape between them. The cabin stood a few dozen yards from the tree line, wooden boards darkened by years of weather. He backed the truck close to the porch, killed the engine, and just sat for a moment. The silence pressed in, not a bird call, not even wind through reeds, only the slow ticking of the cooling engine and the dog's unsteady breathing. "All right," he said at last, "let's see what we brought home." He hauled the sack out carefully. It was heavier than before, or maybe his arms had turned to water. The weight bent his back, forcing him to shuffle instead of step. The dog jumped out, barked once, then stopped again, pacing behind him, refusing to come near the porch steps. He set the bundle down just inside the doorway. The cabin swallowed the sound of its landing with an oddly hollow echo. He stood there, trying not to feel how cold it had suddenly become. The lamp flame flickered pale blue at its edges. "You staying out or in?" he asked the dog. The shepherd whined, lying down on the first porch plank where shadow met sunlight. No movement could coax him further. The fisherman sighed, closed the door halfway, but left it unlatched. Some foolish feeling that shutting it completely would make things worse. He wiped his hands on a towel and turned to face the sculpture. For a moment, he considered leaving it as it was, burlap and rope intact. But curiosity gnawed deeper than caution. When he unwrapped it, the air shifted again. The temperature dropped so fast his breath fogged in the dim light. The windows gathered dew on the inside, beading like sweat. The figure before him looked stranger than it had at the riverbed. Clean lines emerged beneath the drying silt, smooth shoulders, a torso twisted slightly as though caught halfway between motion and stillness. The surface gleamed faintly with that same faint warmth against the cool air, a contradiction that unsettled him more than he admitted. He fetched a rag and a basin of water from the counter. The water shimmered against the sides of the bowl, forming small ripples on its own. He dipped the rag, then touched the sculpture's chest. Mud peeled away like skin. Beneath it ran a shallow engraving, a spiral beginning at the sternum and curling outward around the form as if following an invisible current. He traced it once, then again. The line felt almost soft under his fingertip, not carved, but alive inside the material. A faint hum seemed to come from the wood stove, though the fire had burned low. He stepped back, staring. "You're nothing but stone," he whispered, half hoping the words would end the strangeness. But the ticking of the clock slowed until each second felt stretched. As dusk came, a gray film seemed to settle over the room. Colors dulled, even the red of the rug near his boots turned muddy brown. He lit another lamp, but the glow didn't reach the corners. The air smelled of wet clay again, the same scent as the river when it had begun to dry. He poured a drink to quiet his nerves, then sat across from the thing, elbows on knees, eyes unfocused. The dog barked outside once, short, frustrated. Then silence again. Somewhere in the walls, the wood creaked softly, a long, drawn-out sigh like a board warping slowly under tension. He called into the dark, "It's just the temperature shift." The words calmed nothing. The first knock came just before midnight. 3 dull thuds against the porch boards. He rose instantly, lantern high, expecting wind or branch. Outside, nothing moved but the grass. The dog was standing near the steps, staring through the window with its head low, teeth bared in a silent snarl. He opened the door halfway. "Get inside, boy. It's cold." The dog backed up instead, growling low. "All right, suit yourself." He shut the door, this time fastening the latch. As he turned, another sound reached him. Water, a faint trickle behind the walls. At first, he thought a pipe had burst, but the cabin had none. It drew from the rain barrel outside. The sound came again, rhythmically, sloshing like hands stirring a shallow bowl. He followed it to the table where the sculpture sat. The basin of water beside it quivered, small ripples spreading outward, though nothing touched it. His voice broke the quiet. "Enough." He scooped the basin up, dumped it out the door, and slammed it shut. When he came back, the sculpture seemed to be leaning subtly toward him, though he couldn't swear it had moved. He stayed awake until the first pale light slipped between the planks. Sleep took him only when the birds began to call again. But even in that short rest, the river found him. In the dream, he stood waist-deep in water gone luminous green. The current was noiseless, yet spoke in layered whispers that merged into his own name. The sculpture floated beside him upright, its blank face rippling as if submerged behind clear glass. Slowly, terribly, it turned. Where its mouth had not been, a dark seam opened, forming the vaguest outline of speech. He woke with his pulse pounding. The cabin smelled of wet reeds. Outside, the dog was barking, hoarse, frantic. He stumbled from bed, feet sliding on cold floorboards, slick with moisture. The rug glistened as though rained upon. He stepped into the main room and stopped. The sculpture no longer faced the door. It sat at a slight angle toward the window, tilted just enough to betray intent. Morning light caught the spiral on its torso and threw faint reflections across the ceiling, moving in slow waves. He approached, breathing shallowly. The smell of river water hung thick now, unmistakable. When he brushed the table surface, it came away damp. The dog's barking rose, echoing along the walls. He knelt beside the sculpture and searched for any logical source. A cracked roof, condensation, something ordinary, but found none. His hand brushed the spiral once more, and a pulse of warmth met his palm, so gentle it almost seemed like breath. He stumbled back. Eyes wide, he looked toward the window where the dog pressed its muzzle against the glass, eyes pleading. Beyond the trees, the river glinted pale in the morning sun, flowing slow and wide. He could hear it from here, even though it lay half a mile away. The sound filled the cabin, a steady, submerged rushing that drowned the ticking clock. He backed toward the door, whispering, "We shouldn't have taken it." But the sculpture sat motionless, streaming faint lines of light along its sides like water passing over stone. The dog barked again, and he opened the door to the chill outside. The animal didn't cross the threshold. It only circled once, whining at his legs, then turned to watch the river. He looked back at the figure on the table one last time. In the gray light, it seemed smaller, as though shrinking into itself. But the warmth still lingered in the air, faint and steady. The same warmth he'd felt pulsing from beneath the river mud. He shut the lamp off and stood helpless in the half-light, listening to the steady hum of water that wasn't really there. He woke again at dawn, unsure whether he had actually slept. A film of condensation clung to the windows, blurring the outline of the pines outside. The cabin reeked faintly of algae and old metal, an uncanny echo of the river. His clothes were still damp from the night's sweat. When he opened the door, cold air poured in, sharp and real. The dog stood at the railing, motionless, watching nothing in particular but alert, as if listening to something below the earth. "Morning," he said hoarsely. The sound of his own voice startled him. It felt too loud for the hush surrounding them. The dog didn't move to greet him. Instead, it growled low, an almost inaudible rumble that trembled through the porch boards. Following its gaze, he saw the faint outline of muddy footprints between the cabin and the truck. His own, he thought, until he noticed one extra print shaped just wrong. It had the look of a hand half pressed into wet soil and drawn toward the door before vanishing beneath it. He knelt, brushing the mark. The mud was still damp. Behind him, the dog gave a soft bark, a plea more than a warning. "Must have tracked it myself," he said aloud, though no part of him believed it. He went back inside. The sculpture sat where he'd left it on the table. Yet the light resisted it. The glow from the window seemed to bend around its shape, as if it refused illumination. He reached for the kettle to busy his hands, but the smell of fresh water hit him again, stronger, almost suffocating. When he moved the tablecloth aside, he saw a dark puddle forming beneath the sculpture's base. The water spread in slow rings, soaking into the wood without dripping to the floor. He touched the edge with a fingertip. It was cold at first, then pulsed faintly, like touching the thin skin above one's wrist where blood beats close. He jerked back. Groundwater, he muttered. Has to be seepage from last night's storm. Except there had been no storm. He glanced toward the dog at the doorway. The animal stared straight at him, hackles bristled, saliva pooling between its teeth. In any other moment, he would have scolded it for growling in the house. Now he was the one afraid to raise his voice. He took a mop from behind the stove, wiped the puddle away. The boards underneath gleamed darker than the rest, warped slightly as if swollen from weeks of saturation instead of minutes. When he straightened up, his reflection blurred across the sculpture's smooth surface. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw the figure's head tilt upward, a barely perceptible motion. The illusion made his pulse stutter. "You're just tired," he whispered. He leaned closer. The air between his hand and the object quivered faintly, though he didn't touch it. A vibration, light as a heartbeat, hummed against his palm. That was when the dog lunged. Its snarl tore through the stillness as it snapped at his sleeve, biting hard enough to tear fabric. He shouted in surprise, stumbling backward. The dog released him only when he fell against the wall, its eyes wide, whites flashing. It retreated immediately to the door, ears flat, trembling from nose to tail. "What's gotten into you?" he gasped, clutching his torn sleeve. The dog stood there panting, chest heaving, gaze flicking between him and the sculpture. Then it gave a short, desperate bark and scratched at the door, claws scrabbling against wood. The message was clear. Leave. He slammed his fist weakly on the table. "It's just a rock!" The words came out half shout, half confession. Silence followed, heavy as water. He looked down again. The puddle he had wiped minutes earlier had returned, larger now. Droplets slid from nowhere along the sculpture's sides, streaking downward like sweat. He reached out in spite of himself and pressed his palm flat against its surface. The warmth surged stronger this time, steady, rhythmic. He held it there, entranced, until the faint percussion resolved into pattern. 2 beats close together, then a pause. A heartbeat, unmistakable. He snatched his hand back, heart thudding. The pattern continued even without his touch, echoing through the table legs into the floorboards. The lamp flickered, its flame bending as if tugged by a hidden tide. The dog whimpered once, lowering itself to the floor. Slowly, he approached the window. Through the fogged glass, he could see the sliver of river glinting between trees. Its surface trembled, though there was no wind. From this distance, he could swear the water line seemed higher than yesterday. Maybe the dam released too much, he reasoned. Runoff or thaw. He clung to the explanation, though he knew it didn't fit the season. He rubbed the side of his head, feeling the dull ache of sleeplessness seeping through his skull. When he turned again, the sculpture had shifted closer to the edge of the table by several inches. He hadn't heard it move, yet the damp trail it left marked the wood behind it. He stood frozen, every sense caught between denial and panic. He picked up the entire table in both hands, dragging it toward the door. The weight nearly folded his knees, but adrenaline lent him strength. He flung the door open, morning air flooding the dim room. "All right, you win," he muttered through clenched teeth. The dog scrambled aside as he dragged table and sculpture halfway onto the porch. He hesitated there, breath fogging in the cold. Outside, light hit the figure's surface, and for the first time he saw faint grooves glowing along that spiral engraving. soft blue in daylight, like veins illuminated beneath skin. The glow pulsed in sync with his heartbeat for one measured instant before slowing into its own rhythm. He stopped moving. Something in that rhythm soothed and called at once, a cadence he recognized but couldn't place. The river's current where it breaks around stones, the hush between casts when the line droops weightless. Every fisherman knows that silence, the moment before the catch. Behind him, the dog gave a guttural bark, snapping the trance. He blinked hard and dragged the table the rest of the way out. The sculpture thudded as it met the porch boards. It seemed smaller again in sunlight, duller, almost pitiful. His anger surged, not at the object, but at himself, for letting fear weave nonsense. He turned back inside to fetch the burlap sack. When he returned, the dog was standing rigid at the edge of the steps, staring not at him, but beyond, toward the line of trees. Its body trembled, and a soft whine slipped from its throat, one note held too long. He followed its gaze. Somewhere far off, a sound like rushing water moved through the still forest. The echo tightened his chest. The river should have been too low to roar, yet the sound grew clearer, a steady surge approaching. He gripped the porch post until his knuckles whitened. Beside him, the sculpture gave one soft crack from within, as if stone settling after heat. The glow faded slowly, leaving only wet streaks that caught what little sun broke through the clouds. He looked down at the dog, faithful, terrified, refusing to run. It met his eyes, low and loyal, as though remembering every time he had steered them both safely through storms. That bond held for a long, suspended moment. Then he spoke quietly, a man trying to persuade himself more than anyone else. "It's just a rock," he said again. The words echoed flat across the empty valley, swallowed quickly by the rising murmur of water that shouldn't have been there. He didn't notice the day turning until the light outside shifted to an odd, weightless hue, the color a sky takes right before rain that never comes. The air was too still, the silence too clean. From the porch, he could see the faint shimmer of the river downstream, a thin gleam between skeletal reeds. It looked normal, but every instinct told him something was wrong. He put on his jacket, whistled softly. The dog came only halfway down the steps before stopping, ears bent back, gaze still locked on the tree line. "Come on," he urged. The dog hesitated, whining, then followed reluctantly, tail low. They walked the narrow trail toward the bank, boots crunching through brittle grass, gone gray with dust. When he reached the clearing, the first thing that struck him was the smell. Not the sharp sweetness of fresh water, but a suffocating mix of mud and rot, the smell of depth exposed too soon. The river, which had been drying to a trickle, now churned thick and brown. Patches of foam drifted toward the rocks. Fish floated near the shallows, sides white, eyes clouded in a dead gaze that reflected the overcast sky. He crouched to inspect one, running gloved fingers along its flank. No wounds, no signs of disease, just lifeless and strangely warm to the touch. The current carried more of them. Small, silver bodies rolling gently in the surface film. He looked upstream. The water was higher than it should have been after weeks of drought. No rain clouds, no runoff from the dam. Yet the river swelled with a slow, deliberate rise, curling against the roots like something breathing beneath. The dog barked sharply at the sound of another splash. A ripple spread near the far bank, where the mud had collapsed into a dark hollow. He stepped closer, peering into the pit. Bubbles rose from within, slow and steady, as if air was being exhaled. The ground under his boots quivered, slightly, a subtle vibration traveling through mud and bone alike. He knelt, pressing a hand to the earth. The vibration pulsed again, rhythmic. 3 short thuds, then pause. It matched neither the river's movement nor his own heartbeat. He felt a tightening in his chest, that same unnatural cadence he'd felt through the sculpture the day before. The dog's growl deepened behind him, firm enough to make him turn. The animal took a few hesitant steps backward, tail sweeping low, but eyes locked on the pit. "Easy," he said, forcing calm. "We'll just have a look." Each footstep squelched deeper than the last. The mud seemed to draw him down, reluctant to release each boot. When he leaned forward to look closer, bubbles burst in a slow, deliberate sequence, forming rings that spread across the surface and joined the flowing current as though guided. There was something shining faintly inside the depression, barely visible under a thin layer of silt. A heartbeat later, it flickered once, like light passing through water. Cold swept his skin. He inhaled sharply, the air heavy with the smell of iron. The dog barked again, now insistent, lunging a step forward only to retreat, as if pulled by invisible tension between loyalty and terror. He turned toward it, ready to soothe both their nerves, but words died in his mouth. Behind them, the sound of the river changed pitch, deepening from murmur to low resonance, more felt than heard. He backed away from the hollow. The mud filled itself in, just a thin layer folding inward, quick and final, as if closing a wound. The ripples vanished almost instantly. The earth beneath his feet felt solid again, though every breath told him it shouldn't. The dog whined in the sudden stillness. They walked home mostly in silence. Wind rose sporadically but never reached the ground. It sounded trapped above the trees. When the cabin came into view, the sky had the dull, metallic glow of an approaching storm, though no clouds moved overhead. The dog darted ahead, took position at the porch as if guarding it. Inside, he rinsed his hands. The water from the tap came out faintly tinted, an almost invisible haze that caught the lamplight with a shimmer like river film. He switched the tap off quickly. The echo of that humming pulse, slow, tidal, lingered somewhere deep inside his ear. He tried to distract himself by checking gear, nets, lures, hooks, but all felt unfamiliar, things from another life. His thoughts circled the same truth. Whatever he had dug up didn't want to belong in any house built by men. Still, when he turned toward the table where the sculpture stood, he found his fear tempered by a quieter compulsion. Curiosity doesn't dissolve, it changes shape. The figure waited, dull gray under lamplight. Its spiral pattern seemed different, raised higher, the grooves narrower toward the center. He touched it once more, half expecting pain. The surface was warm again, warmer than body heat. And there, under layers of grime, faint threads of light traced through the spiral. He blinked, leaning closer. The marks shifted subtly, rearranging like silt stirred by a slow current. He stumbled back, knocking a chair over. The glow faded slightly, returning to dull sheen, yet leaving his eyes full of afterimages. He tried to speak, but found his throat tight, dry. The dog barked from outside, frantic this time, claws raking at the doorframe. He ran to open it. The animal didn't cross the threshold, but pointed its muzzle toward the woods, growling continuously. Out past the trees, the low thrum he'd heard earlier rolled again, louder now. A deep note carried through the ground more than air. He stepped onto the porch. The boards beneath him vibrated in measured rhythm. Off toward the river, The grass bent in gentle waves, though no wind touched his face. He could see the waterline climbing minute by minute, licking at stones, swallowing the exposed mud where the sculpture had lain. "Can't be," he whispered. "There's no rain." He watched until the surface reached a thin branch that had hung far above it that morning. The river was rising, deliberate as tide drawn by invisible moon. He felt the urge to run, to warn the neighbors 3 miles downriver, but the magnet of knowing held him still. He had to understand. Every instinct built by years on this water told him floods belonged to storms. Yet this was the calmest sky he'd ever seen. He went back inside, trembling hands gripping the doorframe. The sculpture waited, unchanged but for a subtle darkening, as though moisture seeped through from within. When he leaned down and brushed the surface with a cloth, the threads of light brightened again. Finer symbols surfaced along its arms, shapes that twisted like miniature currents. The air thickened around him. The lamp flame shrank, color draining from the room until the light came only from those faint blue etchings. The pattern moved like a breathing body. Glow, fade, inhale, exhale. He jerked backward in panic and struck his shoulder against the wall. The flame extinguished entirely, plunging him into darkness broken only by those lines. The dog whined outside, pacing, nails clicking on the boards. He stumbled to the window. Through the glass, he saw the river glint again between the pines, broader now, shimmering with faint, internal light that mirrored the sculpture's pulse. The correlation hit him at once. Each time the symbol flared, the river's glow brightened. When it dimmed, the current slackened. He fell into the nearest chair, breath coming short. The dog began to howl then, a low, mournful tone that pierced through the vibration and almost steadied him. He whispered to himself, "You're right, boy. I should have left it." But he didn't move to discard it. The light subsided on its own, returning the house to murky dusk. The silence afterward was immense. Only the faint tapping of water against the porch supported the idea that the flood might already have reached his yard. He walked to the door and cracked it open. The smell of the river entered first, thick and humid. The dog crouched low but stayed near him, loyal even as its body trembled. Together they listened to the strange, steady rush beyond the trees, a sound neither growing nor fading, a constant summons. He shut the door softly, unwilling to face what waited outside, yet unable to look away from the thing that had brought it. The sculpture sat in shadow, faintly glistening under residual light. It seemed almost to breathe in time with the current beyond. And as he leaned against the door, chest heaving, one truth settled heavy and sure: the river wanted it back. What he didn't know was how gently it would ask. He didn't sleep that night, not even after the river's roar steadied to a ceaseless hush. Every creak of the cabin sounded like water pressing against wood. The dog lay curled by the door, not resting, only waiting. The lamp burned low, flame small and trembling, casting the sculpture's shadow up the wall in a shape that no longer matched its body. By dawn, he sat at the table again, eyes raw, breath shallow. The sculpture's surface had turned the color of wet stone after rain, darker and more defined. The spiral running through its center glowed faintly whenever he exhaled, dimming when he drew air in again, as though the object breathed opposite him. He reached for his coffee, but the cup rattled softly on the table, tiny ripples piecing across its surface. No breeze, no motion. He lifted the cup slowly. The sound that filled the cabin wasn't silence anymore. It was murmur, low and layered, like a crowd whispering underwater. He leaned forward, straining to hear words. None formed, only harmonics rising and falling. The dog groaned, shifting uneasily. Then the whisper sharpened into structure, two, maybe three voices overlapping, liquid consonants that carried rhythm without meaning. They came from the sculpture itself. He clamped his hands over his ears. The sound didn't stop. It tunneled inward, vibrating behind his eyes. He whispered, "Stop it," and the air answered, not in echo, but in mimicry. The voices repeated his words, drawn out and dampened. "Stop it." The lights flickered. The window panes sweated moisture that trickled down like slow rain. He stumbled to his feet, knocking the chair aside. "You're not real," he told it. "You're a rock, nothing more." The muttering deepened, matching the cadence of water rushing against stone. His father's warning came back to him then. How rivers remember what men take, how they reclaim it in floods or dreams. He laughed hollowly, the sound ugly in the rippling air. "You can't want anything, you're just—" The whisper cut him off with a rush of syllables that almost shaped his name. He backed toward the window. Beyond the trees, the river shone pale, high, enough now to cover half the yard. Between each flicker of lightningless luminescence, he saw patterns move across its surface, spirals rippling exactly like those carved into the sculpture. The dog rose suddenly, barking in hoarse bursts. It lunged between him and the table, head low, teeth bared, as if guarding him from something unseen. The sculpture pulsed brighter at the movement. A drop of water formed along its shoulder and slid down to the table edge, where it sizzled softly on contact with wood. He grabbed a rag to wipe it. The fabric darkened instantly, turning slick and cold, then tore in his hands as though soaked through. He flung it aside and stumbled backward. The dog's barking became frantic, echoing in fractured rhythm with the whispers. He had to end this, had to undo what he'd started. He went to the electric lantern hanging by the wall. The light flickered twice and went out completely. Power gone. The only illumination came from the sculpture, its inner light spreading unevenly, bleeding faint color into the room. He swore under his breath, groped for the matches, lit a candle. The flame bent away from the sculpture, drawn by unseen current. He took that same motion as a sign. "Fine," he rasped, grabbing his old shovel from beside the door. "We'll put you back." The dog bolted to the threshold, scratching furiously, eager but unwilling to leave without him. The river's sound filled every gap in the cabin walls, an omnipresent rush that had no direction. He wrapped the sculpture in canvas, layers thick enough to hide its glow, though faint blue still leaked through like veins. When he lifted it, the warmth that once frightened him now burned hot enough to sting. His arms shook from effort and heat. He staggered to the door. The dog pressed close to his leg, whimpering. "You'll stay with me," he muttered. "We'll fix this, boy." Lightning flickered outside, though no thunder followed. He stepped out into windless air that smelled of rust and rain. The ground beneath the porch squelched with standing water. His boots sank half an inch with each step. The dog circled once, barking at the dark tree line, then fell in behind him as he trudged toward the swelling glow of the river. Behind them, the cabin groaned like an old hull at sea, boards shifting in slow rhythm with the current's rise. He looked back once, saw lamplight flash from inside, though none were lit, just the shifting reflection cast through the open door. Halfway down the path, Fatigue clawed at him. He stopped, leaning on the shovel handle, clutching the heavy bundle to his chest. From within it came a low vibration, steady as a second heartbeat lodged against his ribs. "I just want peace," he whispered, voice cracking. "You hear? Peace." The river answered with a sound like distant thunder rolling from underground, pressure built in the air, not storm, but water drawn taut. His steps quickened despite the weight, driven by desperation more than clarity. The dog darted ahead, then back, as if herding him along. Its fur dripped, though no rain touched it. Steam rose faintly from its coat, where stray drops of the sculpture's runoff landed, evaporating instantly. Loyal even now, still guiding him from harm he couldn't name. He broke through the last stand of reeds. The river stretched beyond, no longer a line, but a sheet of motionless shine. It had risen halfway up the nearest trees, yet the surface was smooth, unmoving, as if waiting for him. He unwrapped one corner of the canvas. Pale light spilled across his hands, pulsing faster, brighter, aligning to his breaths again. The voices returned, softer this time, almost coaxing. They layered one atop another until they resembled running water reciting words he barely recognized. Back, back, back. Tears prickled behind his eyes. He shook his head. "I'm trying." He took one step toward the flood's edge. The ground slid beneath him, sudden suction pulling mud away. His boots filled instantly with cold water. The fabric around the sculpture writhed, its outline distorted. He glimpsed a shifting of limbs, or what might have been limbs, beneath the canvas. Lightning flashed again, close enough to turn the river's surface white. For a breath-long instant, he saw his reflection not in the water, but in the wet cloth. His face stretched, features warping as though seen through deep current. The illusion made him stumble backward. He turned toward the cabin. The dog was barking from the slope, pleading. Stormlight illuminated its figure, a lone animal at the boundary between safety and devotion. He met its eyes. The bond between them steadied his spinning mind. "Almost done," he said. Then the sculpture moved. Not a trick of light this time, but real, unmistakable. The canvas lifted from within, pulse synchronized with the river's growing roar. A line formed beneath the fabric, an opening flexing like a mouth. He shouted, swung the shovel onto the bundle to pin it down. The wood handle quivered in his grip. The dog leapt beside him, growling, teeth flashing toward the writhing form. For a moment, everything. The dog's cry, the rising flood, the whispers bleeding from beneath the tarp, merged into one unbearable sound. He pressed the blade harder, voice breaking. "You stay down!" The resistance ceased suddenly. Stillness fell. Only the rush of water remained, louder than before. He stared, breath ragged. The canvas lay motionless now, heavy and soaked. Then came the smallest shift, a ripple along the ground. He looked toward the trees. Through the downpour of unseen rain, the river glowed brighter, light spilling over banks that no longer existed. The water was coming for him, slow but absolute. He tightened his grip on the shovel, muttering over and over, "It's just a rock, it's just a rock," until the words lost shape. Behind him, the dog barked once, sharp, decisive, as if to say, "Then let it go." A pulse of light responded from beneath the canvas, dim yet final. The sculpture's shape melted back into stillness. He stood frozen, windless, drenched in the rising warmth that filled the air even as the river reached toward the path. For a final dizzy moment, he thought he heard his father's voice within the whispers, not angry, but tired. You were told to ask the river why. The shovel slipped from his grasp and sank into the mud. He stared at the wrapped figure, chest heaving, and whispered hoarsely, "Then tell me." No answer came, only that low, building hum from both water and stone until they became the same thing. The air vibrated. The lamp back at the cabin burst with a soundless flash. He covered his face against the glare. When he looked again, the sculpture's surface had begun to shift beneath the fabric, its once smooth contour breaking apart like clay dissolving in current. The dog whimpered, pressing itself to his leg, but did not run. Its loyalty held even as the ground beneath them trembled, as if the very riverbed sought them both. He said nothing more, only clutched the canvas close, staggering backward toward the porch that might already be underwater. The sky hung silent, the air metallic and sharp. He reached the steps just as the first surge of floodwater licked the yard. That was when he finally understood. The river had not risen to reclaim its own. It had come to erase the witness who wouldn't stop looking. The first raindrop fell even though the sky remained a pale, unmoving gray. It struck his face cool and sharp, followed by another and another, until the still air filled with sound. The rain came from no direction he could name. It fell sideways, then upward, swirling as though caught in current rather than wind. He hunched over the wrapped sculpture, gripping it close against his chest. The heat radiating through the soaked canvas felt alive. Steam rose where the warm shape met the cold rain, coiling around him in strips of fog. The dog barked behind him, voice nearly lost in the rising hiss of water sliding down the slope. He could already hear the river breaking its banks, not crashing, rising. The sound poured through the ground, deep and persuasive. He staggered forward, feet sinking into mud that no longer held form. Each step was a struggle. The weight of the bundled shape dragged him sideways, unbalancing his stride. The dog darted ahead, snapping over its shoulder as if trying to urge him back. Lightning flickered in the wrong part of the sky, low, rolling through the trees like veins of diffused fire. There was no thunder, only vibration. He shouted above the noise, "We'll put it back, all right? It's finished. Just hold on." The dog barked once, then plunged through sheets of rain toward the thicker grass where the river's glow had begun to show. The fisherman followed, knees sinking deep with each movement. The ground shuddered softly underfoot, an uneven pulse that echoed the sculpture's inner rhythm pressing against his chest. When he reached the edge of the clearing, the river revealed itself in full, unnatural motion. No clear wave, no crest. The entire surface seemed to draw breath. The current swirled outward from the center like a giant spiral, fed by nothing but its own momentum. Bright veins of light ran beneath the surface, matching the symbols carved on the object in his arms. He stumbled closer, but could go no further. The bank had dissolved into sliding muck. The dog stood a few yards away, soaked and trembling, its eyes fixed on him. It growled once, low and pleading. He dropped to his knees, clutching the bundle, speaking directly into the windless air. "All right, take it back. Whatever you are, whatever this means, take it." He lifted the sculpture high and heaved it forward. For a moment, nothing happened. The canvas hit water without a splash, simply sinking as if absorbed. Then silence. The river froze, literally paused, the rain suspended mid-fall. Even the dog stopped moving. The stillness was so total he could hear his own pulse, like water trapped in shell. Right before panic claimed him, the river exhaled, A roar tore across the valley, deep as collapsing stone. Sheets of water surged up from beneath rather than across. He fell backward, dragged by the undertow that hadn't existed a breath earlier. The dog lunged toward him, teeth locked on his sleeve. Together they slid down the bank, cold closing over them in a single, sweeping rush. Underwater, color vanished. The world turned blind green. He kicked upward, lungs aching, clutching at invisible roots. Some force pulled at his legs, insistent but not violent, as if trying to keep him from leaving. He caught a breath when his head broke the surface. "Go," he rasped to the dog, though it swam stubbornly in circles near him. Another surge seized him, tumbling him sideways. He collided with a half-submerged tree trunk and clung to it, splinters scraping deep cuts in his palms. The flood's pressure screamed in his ears. Through the churning water, he glimpsed flashes of light, faint spirals streaming from below, curling upward like uncoiling ropes of brilliance. He thought he saw the sculpture again, far beneath him, turning slowly in the current. Its surface no longer solid, shifting between shapes the mind wasn't made to read. He blinked, salt and grit from his eyes. When he looked again, it appeared almost human, almost reflection, rising and falling in rhythm with the water's pulse. "Enough!" he shouted, choking on the intake. His voice vanished instantly into the noise. The current twisted him sideways, ripping him from the trunk. The dog barked once, a sound sharp but distant, then the water folded over them both. He fought upward through the pull, hand snaring low roots jutting from the bank. One final grip anchored him. He dragged half his body out of the water, gasping, chest burning with air and mud. The river blurred below, flashes of blue flickering through the surface like lightning trapped underwater. He saw the sculpture's glow fading, sinking deeper, its light growing weaker as it dissolved into the silt. The rain began to thin, but the roar persisted. He searched madly for the dog. "Buddy!" The name cracked in his throat. For a breath, he saw the animal struggle against the current near a floating branch, eyes wide with instinctive terror and love. Then another surge lifted them apart, sweeping the animal toward darker water. "Stay with me!" he screamed, plunging forward, but a new wave slammed into him from the side. This one wasn't cold. It burned. He realized the warmth filling the air earlier had not left. It now lived in the flood itself. Water clung to his skin like steam, carrying the faint scent of the sculpture's stone. He managed one last look toward the glowing river heart before the current closed above him again. Time slipped. His lungs emptied. Images spun through the darkness. His father on the riverbank years ago, the same quiet warning repeated like prayer. If the river gives you something, it expects something back. He tried to answer, but swallowed water instead. Then silence again. Weightlessness. A dim light shimmered ahead, not sky, but reflection bending from below. Within it drifted the sculpture, whole once more. Its face, clear now, formed vaguely like his own. The spiral on its chest opened into a hollow void, and out of that void, a single thread of breath, not water, moved toward him. It touched his wrist like the warmth of life itself. Everything inside him went still. He didn't feel the moment he lost grip or when the current carried him into dark stability. Only the fading sense that he was being pulled somewhere kinder than fear. Above, the flood reached its crest. The dog broke surface first, coughing violently, fighting against the reverse pull. Somehow, it found footing on the half-submerged hill above the bank, clawing upward through roots and shattered bark, until solid earth gave way beneath its paws. It turned, howling toward the river's center, but the space where the man had been was already smoothing over. No struggle, no trace, only widening rings that glowed faintly before dimming out. The rain stopped. The valley breathed again. The swollen water withdrew as quickly as it had come, drawing lines of foam down to a calm mirror. By the time silence replaced the hiss, the dog stood alone amid receding puddles, mud up to its chest, eyes locked on the place where the sculpture had disappeared. In the fading light, the river looked peaceful, deceptively familiar. But where water met silt, a faint shimmer pulsed beneath the surface. One last glint of the submerged figure turning within the depths, not lifeless, simply waiting for the next calling hand. The dog whined softly, then lay down, exhausted, at the edge where water lapped against mud. Its fur dripped onto the reflection, breaking the image of clouds above into perfect rings. The sound was almost gentle again, as if the river was whispering gratitude. The fisherman's hat floated past, spinning once before it, too sank. Rainwater in its brim formed a small spiral before vanishing. The dog raised its head, watching until darkness thickened across the waterline. Then it growled once, low, mournful, guarding the stillness left behind. By morning, the valley lay under a gray haze. The storm had gone somewhere else, leaving behind puddles that reflected an indifferent sky. The river, which had raged hours before, now moved in quiet, rippling calm, as though embarrassed by its own violence. Mist hung low across the banks, hiding what the water had borrowed and almost returned. Searchers from the nearby town came later that day. They followed the trail of wreckage upstream. Broken branches, scattered boards, the fisherman's overturned boat half buried in mud. His cabin leaned crooked, one wall sunk knee-deep in silt. It looked less destroyed than drowned, and spat out again. They found his tools near the porch, the shovel still embedded in the earth beside a deep depression that reached down to the soaked roots. Footprints circled it, pointed toward the river, and then nowhere at all. One of the men muttered that he must have been swept away trying to save his dog. But then they saw the dog. It lay near a section of fallen fence, caked in mud but breathing. When one of the searchers knelt beside it, the animal opened its eyes and growled, not at them, but at the river's edge. Its paws were cut, tail limp, yet it forced itself upright with a tremor of exhaustion. Even wounded, it stood guard facing the water, as though expecting something to surface. The men whispered. One called for the dog softly, offering food, but it didn't move. They left a bowl nearby, unable to coax it closer. The older of the group looked at the collapsed section of bank, where the water still shimmered faintly. He rubbed his jaw. No man could have survived that current, he said. The others nodded, uneasy. By dusk, the wind shifted. Small waves lapped gently at the mud, washing new patterns into it. And when the light bent just right, the men swore they saw something glint below the surface. An unbroken sheen of pale stone, woven with faint spirals moving lazily in the current. It didn't look lost, only waiting. None of them went closer. They gathered their gear, marked the spot out of duty, and left before nightfall. Darkness returned fast, thick with the quiet hum of frogs and distant crickets reclaiming the silence. The dog limped down the slope toward the water, every step heavy but determined. It stopped where silt met the first fingers of the river, lowered its head, and stared into the shallows. Beneath, a vague outline shifted, a hollow curve like a shoulder or a mask gleaming just under the surface. The current touched the dog's paws, cool and harmless, but it still growled, a sound weary and low. Then, slowly, it lay down. Its chin rested on the mud, eyes never leaving the shape underwater. The wind rose briefly, carrying a single ripple that brushed against its muzzle and sank again. Villagers visited over the next few days. They saw the ruin of the cabin, the half-sunken pile of timber that once framed quiet days. No body, no clear sign of struggle, just the marks on the slope leading down, and at the river's corner, the dog. It didn't bark anymore, didn't eat unless someone set food far from the water. It stayed exactly where they found it, staring. Word spread that the flood had taken one life and left an unbroken stone on the shore. Some said it was a carved idol. Some called it drift from the old days before the dam. Children dared each other to touch the water near it, but no one ever did. When the moon rose, that section of river carried its own reflection differently, too bright, too still. They said it looked as if the water itself remembered a man who hadn't listened. Nights grew quiet again, the world pretending peace. Yet anyone walking that trail just before dawn might hear a faint rumble beneath the fog, a steady, slow inhale that sounded a lot like the breath of something deeper than the river. And above it, barely audible, a single dog's growl repeating every few moments, loyal as a heartbeat. Rivers remember differently than people do. They erase with one hand and bury with the other. By the time weeks passed, only the reshaped banks hinted that anything unusual had ever happened. Grass grew back across the flattened slope, reeds sprouted where walls had once stood, and the sound of running water softened into background life. But the locals spoke quieter near that stretch. The current had become part of their cautionary talk, half lesson, half confession. Old fishermen who knew the missing man would shake their heads and say curiosity sounds a lot like courage until something answers back. Younger ones pretended not to listen, though they cast their lines farther upstream, unwilling to tempt echoes. Nobody rebuilt the cabin. The debris was cleared, the path fenced off. Only the dog remained there, thin but watchful. Every morning, it visited the same patch of shore, sniffed the air, and settled as if expecting the familiar voice that would never call again. Some evenings, when fog lay dense over the valley, a ripple would appear just beyond the shallows. The water would draw inward, forming a narrow whirl that caught fragments of moonlight before vanishing. Villagers said it was nothing, shifting currents, tricks of temperature. But those who stood long enough noticed that the whirl always carried the same shape before it dispersed, a slow-moving spiral widening from a point directly beneath the surface where the dog kept vigil. No one dared disturb it. They left food for the animal, whispered small prayers when walking past. The sound of the river at night changed tone, still musical, but threaded with a hum you could feel more than hear. When it rained, the puddles on the path formed faint, concentric rings that lasted longer than water should. In time, the tale slipped into a local warning told to newcomers who visited when the water was low. Never dig where the river buries its silence. Few understood what it meant, but everyone repeated it. By the season's turn, only one figure still cared. The dog waited, day after day, beside water gone ordinary again. Some evenings it tilted its head, ears twitching to sounds no one else could hear. And when mist rose just after sundown, its eyes caught the faint blue glimmer reflecting from below, like light from an old wound refusing to close. The loyal creature didn't move, just watched, tail curled tight, breath steaming in the cold. It had learned what its master hadn't, that some things call you not to rescue them, but to see if you'll look twice. The river kept its rhythm, endless and indifferent. Yet under that rhythm lived memory, coiled quiet and patient in the depths. The dog still waits by the water, loyal to a man who couldn't stop looking. If you think you know what truly slept beneath that river, tell me below. And if stories like this make you wonder what might be hidden in the quiet places, subscribe for more strange human-centered discoveries.